Okay, so hi everybody. The previous panel was about membership that matter. This is about membership that also matter. And my name is Eduardo Suarez. I'm a journalist fellow at the Reuters Institute at the University of Oxford. I'm studying memberships and subscription models, especially in European news organizations and with a special focus in Spain and in the United Kingdom. So as you probably know, in the last couple of years, we have seen the rise of membership models and subscription models, even for digital-only news organizations like Quartz or Vox or BuzzFeed News. Yesterday was announced another membership program from Snopes, the fact-checking company. And membership is a very ambiguous term. I mean, it has many flavors. It means different things for different people. Some outlets have a more open model, and we have people at the panel that will talk about that. Some others have a very closed model with very hard paywalls. We'll talk about that also. And of course, this is a part of a broader trend, not just in journalism, but in the economy. There's a rise of the subscription economy, of the membership economy, companies selling flowers, gyms, razors, all kind of companies are embracing this model, and of course journalism is part of that too. Why and why now? I would say that it creates a recurring revenue stream, which is very handy. It removes lumpiness for the business side. It creates something predictable. And also it builds a more direct relationship with your audience, as the previous panel discussed before. But I think what is very important, and I'm sure we will talk about that, is that it generates an ongoing data stream that can be used to improve the product, to improve the service, and to know more about your readers. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the speakers. On my far right, you have Amanda Michel. She's the Global Director and the Senior Product Manager for Contributions at The Guardian. Before that, she worked for ProPublica and the Huffington Post. And in the last 3 years, she has led the growth of memberships and contributions for The Guardian globally. These have been super successful. As you know, in November they announced they have passed the milestone of 1 million contributors, and they just announced a new target, 2 million in the next 3 years. So next you can see Lea Korsgaard. She's the founder and editor of Zetland, which is a successful Danish media company dedicated to digital journalism as a force for good. She has written some books, and before founding Zetland, she was a feature writer at Politiken and Berlingske, right? Okay. And then here you have Maria Ramirez. She is the Chief Strategy Officer at eldiario.es, which is a profitable news outlet in Spain, focused on investigative reporting. They have 34,000 members, and 40% of the revenue comes from the readers. Well, she has worked many years as foreign correspondent in the US and in Brussels. She's the founder of a couple of new startups, and she's also an Eman Fellow at Harvard and a Pritzker Fellow at the University of Chicago. So, well, I would like you to tell us, to share with us first, just a story that your organization has published recently, and that, well, give us a flavor of what you do, of the kind of editorial model that you have and the kind of ambition that you have.
Okay. Well, hi. Thank you. If I had to choose a story, I guess that could be a scoop that we published actually 1 year ago. And we're very conscious, very aware of the 1 year ago, because now the renewals of those members is coming. So we're really like sort of fighting to get all these members that came out of this big scoop 1 year ago, just to say. And the scoop was a political scandal about a very popular politician in Spain, Cristina Cifuentes. She was the president of the region of Madrid and a possible future potential prime minister from the Conservative Party. we discovered that she faked her academic record to get a master's degree in a public university with public funding. And during a couple of months, we published like how this unfolded and how it was finally the cover-up that she tried to do after we started publish the story. It's always a cover-up. What made her resign? She resigned like several weeks after our scoop. And it's a very good example because we mostly do political coverage, daily coverage, although we do also reportage. Our focus is kind of a daily newspaper. We publish like 80 stories a day or something like that, and very much focus on investigative journalism, on politics, on business. And this particular story brought us around 10,000 members in 6 weeks, and that was our record, and that was a really big push for us. Now we're around 35,000 members, so that was really a big change. And I would say that that story is very representative of the kind of reporting that we do, and also of some of the challenges that now we face, as now we're trying to just keep those members with us 1 year later. So far has been good. There is like 90% renewal of those members who came to us because of this particular story. But I think that is also like a testimony of like, it's really good that you are growing your members based on scoop and on your journalism pieces, but probably you need more if you wanna grow faster and if you wanna sort of keep them. So it's the journalism, the scoops, but there's something else, and probably it's like along the lines of the relationship, of the service that you have to sustain. And well, our experience is that mostly those kind of stories are like the big initial push to sort of grow, and then the challenge is now to sustain that growth. And as Eduardo said, more or less the balance is almost 40% depending on members' revenue and 60% of ad revenue. And we really would like to invert that balance. I think we are still probably going to be a mixed model news outlet, but it could be better to have like 60 from readers and 40 from ads.
Yeah, so let me begin by just sort of set the scene and get the basics right here. So Zetland is a high-quality member-shaped and member-based digital newspaper. We're based in Copenhagen, but we cover all of Denmark and all of the world if that's relevant, when that's relevant. Well, and we have a value proposition to make good use of our members' attention. That's really core. Don't waste our members' time. That's really central to what we promise them. We have no ads, which taps into this value proposition. We're not going to take your attention and sell it to the ad people. So there's no ads. It costs, I think, around. We don't have the euro in Denmark because we are weird. It's a weird country. So, but it's around 17 euros a month, half the price for students. And then we have what I call today the generous model or the correspondent model of a paywall. So every member can share as many articles as they like, and by doing that, they help us spread the word about our stories and about our mission, in fact. Okay, so the story I want to highlight here is a very different story from Maria's, because it's more in the softer end of our spectrum. It's a project that our school and everyday life writer Sarah Alford did recently about intensive parenting. So she wanted to raise the question, why is it that we today think that whatever we do as parents is gonna determine our kids' destiny? You know, if they eat salmon, or if they, how many words they're gonna know before the age of 3, and you know, it can play a role, but maybe it's not the destiny that springs from or comes from that. Okay, so that was a project. What is intensive parenting, and what does it do to our way of being moms and dads? So she wrote a series of articles, got a lot of input and feedback from the members, ended up publishing a book based on the article series, which became a tour. So she has been traveling around Denmark for the last 6 months, giving speeches and initiating this conversation with our members and with Danes about how to go about being a modern parent. And then that led to a podcast. So the members she met on her way asked her, you know, to go dive into myths. Is it true that you cannot drink 3 cups of coffee when you're pregnant? Is that really true? No, you can drink coffee as, you know, maybe if you drink 30 cups of coffee a day. Yeah. And so the podcast was Sarah as protagonist, you know, as our so the detective who, on behalf of our members, went searching for the answers, for the right answers. Yeah, so that was sort of a multifaceted project, which was really rooted in our members' curiosity and yeah.
That's a great example, Lea.
Yeah.
What's your story, Amanda?
I was going to say, I really like how you have used the quest narrative to
Yeah.
evolve the membership model. So I'm Amanda. I work at The Guardian, and it's hard to pick a story, so I'm picking a personal favorite of mine. And that is, sadly, what's called the Windrush scandal. Amelia Gentleman is the reporter who broke the story, and it took tremendous work. I think that's one of the reasons why we're really proud of it. Not only did she follow it for a long time, but she kept pushing and pushing and publishing until at some point the government had to respond. So what was the story? It's that the government wrongly classified thousands of long-term British residents as illegal immigrants. And following the reporting, both the Prime Minister has apologized, the Home Secretary said she was sorry, and then resigned her office, and now the government is going to be giving compensation to those who were wrongfully treated and damaged by the scandal. So this story is a story of persistence. It's a story of tremendously difficult, painstaking work. But it also sits among a bunch of other, I think, high-profile stories for The Guardian. So investigations are something that we feel really strongly about. We also know that our readers care very strongly about our investigations. But in fairness, I think for all of us, we'd probably say the same thing. This is one story of many, and so it sits alongside of our journalism of, you know, the environment, as well as cooking recipes, and a host of other things. Do you want me to say a little bit more about The Guardian's model? So The Guardian is an old establishment, so nearing 200 years old. You have theguardian.com and its app, but as well as its print paper, which is a 6-day-a-week paper, and its sister publication, The Observer, which is published on Sundays. So we have a global, national, and local remit offices in London, New York, and Sydney. And you had asked me how many stories that we publish on a day. A lot. And so I think the 2 things to know, one is what we refer to as our ownership structure. So The Guardian is owned by the Scott Trust. And that sort of unique model affords us both a financial and editorial independence. The responsibility of what we publish, the stories that we cover, rests solely in our editor-in-chief. That is the final line. She is the steward of the ship. We have a mixed model. So yes, we have advertising, and that is a core part of the business. But in the last 3 years, our reader revenue model, and I'll go into describe it a bit more, has grown dramatically and now brings in more revenue than advertising. So what is the reader revenue model? It has essentially 2 pillars. The first is direct support from readers. I can explain in more detail later, but we began with a simple membership proposition that we have continued to sustain but evolved into contributions. In this case, people support us and they support our journalism being open and accessible to everyone around the world. The model is meant to allow people to give as much or as little as they can afford, regardless of where they live and what they earn. We also offer subscriptions. I mentioned the print subscription that you can get. That's something that largely people in the UK would select. But we also have a few other subscriptions. These are based not on a paywall model, but on a way of experiencing the journalism. So for example, if you have the premium tier in the app, you're essentially paying to have use of several of the features and the support of the app, but not actually a paywall around the journalism itself.
One of the most striking things actually about The Guardian is the way you ask for the contribution of your readers with those big text at the bottom of the article with the letters highlighted in yellow. Could you explain me a little bit how did you come up with this and what were the experimentation that you do before adopting that kind of call to action?
So since I'm here, this is a little bit of a joke. I think a lot of people ask us about this. So I think if I can back up and give you the story of why we use that appeal, that probably will, I think, have more, that will help explain a lot. So when we first began to focus on membership, we launched largely an events business. So people became members, and in virtue of being members, they both supported The Guardian, but they could also attend events. But naturally, this is something that's very difficult to scale, and we have readers all around the world. So we began to think about what should it be. And obviously, there's a lot of debate and discussion over what those features or benefits might be. And what we decided to do is to really invest in research. So speaking to our readers to understand what would be a model that would be a natural fit for them, and also what we'd have to do to make sense of it. Now that seems quite obvious, but in retrospect, I remember at the time looking to see how organizations and institutions would pitch their membership propositions. And I hope this isn't offensive in any way, but a lot of times there was sort of a tease, like, support us for just as little as this. And you actually had no idea what was being asked of people. And we found when we talked to our readers that they had some basic questions that we needed to be able to answer. And so we began thinking about what is the actual pitch? What is the explanation? People asked us, they thought it was useful to know that advertising revenues themselves were diminishing. They wanted to know what their support would go towards. They wanted to know actually how much money would they have to contribute. And so what happened is that we actually began to write a longer pitch that answered people's questions and answered their questions immediately. That's why you see that the element that's the end of articles. And over time, that has actually evolved to be much more narrative-led. And I think that's really natural because we're a newsroom. We tell stories, and we can tell our own story. And that's actually, I think, one of the most powerful things that newsrooms can do, but it's also really hard and can feel really awkward. Because as journalists, I think we feel very comfortable telling other people's stories, but less so our own. And so in the process of doing this research and interviews, we learned that some of the ways in which we told our story actually didn't translate, didn't make sense. I mentioned that we're owned by the Scott Trust. We're really proud of this, but it didn't actually mean anything necessarily to our readers when we would just reference it. But what matters to them is that our editorial independence is guaranteed by the Scott Trust and by our editor-in-chief. We also are very proud of our large readership, but we found that when we were continually telling our readers, we're very fortunate we have a readership of 150 million, a month, people would assume we were just raking in cash. They equated the large readership with money. And so over the last few years, the appeal actually, and I think continually writing that appeal and doing that appeal through research and testing, has actually forced a real critical awareness. And that's really hard, I think, inside an institution. It's really thinking about what is the story that we're telling, what are we trying to do, but also how do people perceive it? And having a global readership also means that this has to be clear to people regardless of where they live. If you read it, you'll notice the language. It's, I always say to my team, clear trumps clever. It's very clear, it's very direct, it's matter of fact, it provides people the answers to the questions that they've continually asked us. And then lastly, it's at the end of an article, because we know as well from our readers that that's when they most want us to approach them. That's when they want to consider supporting us. It's after having read something, after having listened to something, after having watched something.
And you also have different messages about different topics. I've noticed that you have a Brexit message and you have a climate change message. Can you explain a little bit that?
You've been watching very, very carefully.
That's my job, yeah.
The truth is so we have, in the last month or two, we've acknowledged the situations that people find themselves in and the reporting that we've done. Although the core of the message that you see, it very much stays the same. So the simplest version is "since you're here," which for us is actually a nice way of just starting the conversation with our readers. I say to my team, you should begin this as you would begin a conversation. Would you feel comfortable walking up to someone, instead of, I think, a very sort of ham-handed, support us now. It's since you have a moment, since you're here, since you finished reading that, and then let us explain what it is that we're asking for. But yes, we have had some messages recently that acknowledge Brexit. We also have some appeals that are more specific on our environmental reporting. So what we've learned is that readers around the world, if there's one subject that they've cared very intensely about, and that doesn't change depending on where they live, it's coverage of the environment. But in general, I feel strongly that, and this is something, if we want to talk about it in more depth, I'm happy to do it here or separately, one-on-one. My real sort of fixation has been for us to have a universal pitch, for us to know how to tell our story that will make sense to someone regardless of where they are, and to really think very hard about that story instead of at the outset running lots of different messages and lots of different places. It's really understanding what is at the heart of this proposition, and that has served us best. So yes, while you've seen some variation, the truth is there's far more in common than there are differences.
Sure. Lea, you mentioned before in what you said, that one of the parts of your appeal is that you don't waste the time of your readers, of your audience. And I read a piece in the Nieman Lab a few days ago that said that 35% of Zetland subscribers state that the manageable number of articles is either the primary or one of the primary reasons for becoming a member. So I would like you to tell us more about this concept of finishability that other news organizations like The Economist, that others are also using, the sense of achievement that a reader has finished a product or something that you send. How do you use that in Zetland?
Well, it's actually quite simple. Less is more. We are here partly because we are here to solve a problem for our members, namely the problem of information overload. And if you are here to solve the problem of information overload, then don't overload yourself, right? So it's really quite simple. So we publish very few stories a day.
How many?
Two stories and a newsletter and a daily news podcast. So you can, as I always say, that there's a finishable feature to our product. And that is worth paying for. It's worth paying for that there's no endless stream. So that's one of the reasons. But also, if that's okay,
sure, of course, yeah.
I feel like commenting on something that you say, which is so interesting when we talk about membership models. It's tone of voice. It's the ability to tell your own story in a voice that doesn't come from nowhere.
Yeah.
That doesn't come from you should support journalism because journalism is good and I'm God, right? And I think you do that very well in your language, your membership language, and and that's just the way, it's a way of building trust in a new way, I think. Not to get authority by sounding as an authority, but by sounding authentic. Which means sometimes saying, we're not perfect. There's cracks in the story as well, right? And also we don't. We publish few stories a day, and we also keep telling our members why we publish few stories a day. It's really important to sort of re-educate your membership base on a weekly basis, I'd say. Keep telling why do you go about your business the way you do. Because it's not obvious necessarily, as you say. It's not obvious that you didn't got tons of money from the readers before. You have to tell that story again and again.
Now everybody is doing a podcast in news organizations, but I know that you are kind of pioneers of that, and that came also from your members. Could you explain how did you start to do audio in Zetland, and how are you doing right now?
Yeah, so I guess it's 2 years ago, we asked our members, what features do you need from us? What do you miss? And that was really interesting. And a lot of them said audio. And not actually podcasting. Some of them did, but they asked us to read our stories aloud. Because, we write quite long stories, maybe sometimes too long. And it's just hard to get time to read a story that takes, 15 minutes to read. But it's not hard to read it through your ears while you're on your bike. So they asked us, please read them aloud in audio versions. So we did just a small test version of that, and it just took off. And then we built our apps, which makes it possible to make a seamless transition from audio to the written words. And then it really took off. So today, 65% of our usage is audio. We're still a written word publication, but people listen to the written word. And for us, it was just really a lesson to ask them what they want, because they really taught us in what way we should go.
In which other ways have you tweaked your value proposition, your editorial product, with the feedback of your members, apart from audio?
Oh, yeah, tons of, like for instance, length, they told us, hey, you're good, but not that good. We don't want to read that long stories. Just, feed ideas to specific stories. What else? I feel like my inbox is sort of I use quite a lot of time to be in dialogue, and you have to sort of that's really part of the proposition.
And Maria, you come from a country, Spain, where not a single legacy big news organization has embraced subscriptions yet, and yet El Diario, which is a very new publication, just 7 years in, has got 35,000 paying members. So what do you think are the reasons why El Diario has done so well in a country which is not used to paying for news, as probably in all the countries are?
In part is because of the moment when El Diario was born in 2012, so it was sort of the end of the crisis, the economic crisis that was a bit worse in Spain than in some other countries. And there was like a general sort of disappointment with news outlets that haven't covered or hadn't alerted about the crisis and were sort of maybe too close to the economic or political powers. So that was a really strong message that worked very well as an appeal, an initial appeal to readers. And that has worked beyond that because of the stories that we publish. Although things in Spain are changing probably in the next few months, because finally the larger news outlets are sort of trying or thinking about trying subscriptions, memberships in different versions of it. El Diario is an open membership model, so similar to The Guardian. We really don't have a paywall, and our content is just open for free for everybody. There is just this little tweak that every night we send the stories to our members first, but it's just for a few hours. And it's like at 10 or 11 at night. And although Spaniards are usually awake until very late at night, but still it's just a few hours because at 6 a.m. The content is just for free for everybody. And that's been a challenge, and we're sort of thinking about what we can offer to our members more, and while still being an open, because it's part of our message that we believe that, well, everybody should have access to information, and we should try to keep that essence, but at the same time, we're in a moment that we feel that if we want to grow, we sort of need to do more. And well, the good news is that also we are seeing that the audience is sort of changing a bit in the last year or so. Finally, we have more readers who are women than men, which has been the case for most news outlets in Spain, in part for Me Too and sort of the women revolution in Spain and the backlash against the women revolution in Spain. And that's something we want to explore more. And in fact, in some of the events that we're doing now, we're seeing an interest from young women. Like a few weeks ago, we did this event for micromachismos, microaggressions. We have the editor of the gender issues and the micromachismos here, Ana Requena, in the first row, if you want to talk to her later. And we found out like a new audience came to this event that we haven't seen before in previous events, like women, but young women, which is like a challenge usually for newspapers, and because most of our members currently are men and kind of from an older generation, but we believe there is something there that maybe we can connect more easily than maybe traditional news outlets. So there is new opportunities that we're hoping to get, even in this new environment where everybody is looking at subscriptions, and probably there's going to be more competition.
And do you think that is a good thing or a bad thing for El Diario that big news organizations in Spain are now going into the same business of subscriptions, memberships, and so on?
Well, it's good that readers get used to paying for news and sort of support news in different forms. Of course, there's going to be more competition. Readers can be maybe members of 1, 2 news outlets, but 3, and Spotify and Netflix, there is really a limited amount of money that probably you're going to spend on news. So that's why also it's important for us trying to maybe ask for support from members in a different way. So it's a challenge to just offer more to members and still be open and still sort of offer something special. So I think it's going to be challenging because, of course, larger news outlets have always more resources to get to readers, but it's interesting.
Well, Maria mentioned events, and before opening it up, I would like Lea and Amanda tell me a little bit about events and how your news organizations are thinking about it and are doing events in Denmark and everywhere, in the case of The Guardian, which is a global news organization.
Yeah, I can start out. So events have been key for our growth, in the sense that it has been sort of the place, sort of a place from where to spread the word, right? So we sometimes make huge live events that we call live journalism. It could be on a theater, for instance, the Royal Theatre in Copenhagen, 1,500 among the audience, and then we showcase among 10 non-fiction stories told from the stage in a variety of ways. So it's, in short, it's TED Talk meets cabaret meets meets Firebond.
Oh, sounds great, yeah.
And then there's there's the thing afterwards, you know, the beer in the bar, the coffee in the bar, where you meet and where you can talk with us and go up and ask us for stuff, for instance, make audio. So that has really been I think there is a in this period of time we live in with so much information, so much fast information, so much quick headlines. There's a need for the event where 1,000 people, for instance, or maybe just 100 people, experience the same thing at the same time, where you are in sync with other people, experience the same story, listening to the same story. It's such a rare opportunity these days. So for us, that was central. That was sort of a way to manifest. This is what Zetland's spirit is, even though we are a digital media.
And you have done events outside Copenhagen too, right?
Yeah. So we really try to do that in order not to become Copenhagen-centric. So we've been around the country. Yeah.
What about The Guardian, Amanda? You told us before about how the membership started with events but didn't work out, but what are you doing right now? Yeah.
So events are important, but they're not central to our support model. So we have Guardian Live, so we are hosting events on a weekly basis, sometimes a daily basis, and people can buy tickets for those. Those are largely in the UK, and they are held around the UK, not just in London. But I think the events that we've focused a bit more on in the last year have been events that have been so closely intertwined with the editorials. So similar to what you were describing, Gary Young had a really amazing reportage Beyond the Blade and has essentially traveled around the UK hosting meetings and discussions with readers. We've done that for Anywhere But Westminster as well. I think those events are really interesting. You know, I mentioned the Quest narrative before. It's, you know, both the journalist and the audience are really trying to answer and make sense of these central questions. And the questions themselves aren't changing, you know, from event to event, but you can explore them in a different context. So I think for me, like, I love the events that are really rooted in the reporting and help people essentially to make sense of what's going on. Those events aren't, like I said, central to our support model, but I think they're a really important way of fulfilling our journalistic mission.
Great. Now we can take questions from the audience, so make the most of it. Who wants to start? Okay, this lady. Yeah. I think there's probably a microphone, right? Is it coming? Right? Yeah, I think so. Yes. Yeah, is Jess in there? Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for the lady of the El Diario. If I understood correctly, your membership allows people only to have access to your news a few hours before the rest of the world, and that's all.
Yeah. Yeah, we sort of send an email with these like stories just in the night, and then everyone could read them at 6 a.m. And then there's a few extra perks, like when we organize events, we send the invitation to the members before anyone else. We're starting to try to do more talks in the newsroom with our members. And then also we send them a print magazine once every 3 months. That's the main thing. But we're thinking also about maybe that new things that we can offer members while still keeping the open. It's a kind of difficult balance, and sort of similar of The Guardian, that is offering some extra information. In our case, we are not such a big newsroom, so we can really sort of do just more information just for members. But we were sort of thinking about new ways, new extras that maybe we can offer members, or at least try to pursue loyal readers who are not members in a more aggressive way. So we're working on that, because other than that, there is no paywall. Yeah, it's open for everybody, and obviously it's really nice, but it's also a challenge for growth.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm also a journalist. I'm from Pakistan, so we have a different sort of situation over there. So I was just wondering, like, when you were talking about events, doing events, or raising awareness about, people joining as members. Also, at the same time, there's a lot of threats towards journalists and having these events So do you think about that? Like right now, even for example, online, when you see, perhaps when you put up your stories in the comment sections, you see a lot of hate against some of the stories and threats. So when you want to build a relationship with members or audience and readers, how do you sift through that kind of feedback and see who's genuinely interested in the journalism you're doing and will be a potential member, and who's just there to troll or attack or harass and perhaps might even come to the events to do that?
In fact, it's not a problem in the sense that for us, in the sense that it's only members who can comment on our stories. And we have really cultivated a culture of respect. So our journalists, they don't moderate, but they're present in the comment section. And our members know that when they write comments, it's not, they will be read. And someone will think there's just not a culture of hate or anything like that. In the course of Zetland's life, we have only deleted one comment or comments from one member who was sick, I think, and that's because of that culture building. And when it comes to angry people showing up, I don't know, we live in Denmark. I think it's just a different country than Pakistan. I know there's angry people, but they wouldn't show up at the Royal Theatre in Copenhagen. So I haven't considered that as a problem, in fact.
So I don't have the experience that you're speaking to, but I thought it was worth mentioning. There are people who support The Guardian who can also occasionally get angry with us, or we have some people who've supported us and have specifically said they very much support us for the investigations, and that their political perspective from there is markedly different than what they see as the rest of the readership. I remember reading an email from someone who said something along the lines of, "I generally find you annoying, but I would rather that the British media ecosystem had you." And they were supporting us because they want to see that kind of debate and discussion. So it's not always the case, in my experience, that support is so narrowly tethered to overwhelming, people can still be critical of the publication of what you do. And I think what you're pointing to is finding and identifying that very difficult line between what can be heartfelt, serious, robust criticism and someone potentially trolling or trying to create disruption. I feel very strongly that we need to have a set of practices and an open environment in which we invite that kind of criticism that makes us better at what we do, and we should have the strength and the ability to deal with it, but the trolling is not something that we would want at our events.
Can I just add a quick thing? I think that the membership model must still allow you the freedom to piss your membership off.
Yes.
That's really key, and in order to do that, you just have to tell people you are not gonna agree with everything that we write. In our case, we're not blue or red. We could be either color.
Can I add one more thing to this? No, because I think sometimes I hear
central, right?
Yes, and I think sometimes when I hear people discussing this, there's often something that happens that really simplifies the conversation. It's like simply people say something like reporting what the readers want. Like I have, over the course of my journalistic career, have always worked very closely with readers, and I think it's so much more complex than that. It's really trying to understand through so many different ways in which you're communicating with people what journalism perhaps the ways in which you cover stories that make them more accessible, that make them easier to understand, that also make them more informative and useful. I don't see that as a simple and crude like supply and demand model. Like part of this is actually trying to do your work better and listening to your audience. We also know that there are stories that our readers will point out to us, bring to us sometimes in the form of a scoop, which I think often in these discussions is sort of conveniently left by the wayside. It's like, set aside the investigative scoops, set aside this, and let's talk about everything else and how readers demand things. But no, we constantly have this exchange.
Yeah, and I know that the people at Diario, most of their audience are on the left, but you have published scoops against left-wing politicians, and I'm curious about the reactions that you got from your readers and from your members too.
Yeah, I mean, in Spain, we do have a lot of angry people, so I feel your pain. And at El Diario, anyone can comment, not just members, but anyone who registers with an email and the website. And, well, we do have a lot of trolling, definitely. What we have done usually is like, well, members like have like a special color, so they are sort of, their comments are highlighted compared to others, and also they have more powers. We have like a little algorithm, so when like a comment gets X votes from a member, it sort of gets hidden, or at least there's an alert for us to let us know there is something going on there. But sometimes also we get also angry comments from our own members and supposedly our more loyal readers. We have published, like recently, a scoop against Podemos, which is a party in the left, and many readers of El Diario support or have supported that party, and we got like angry comments from them. What it usually works for us, especially with them not trolling but real critiques, is just to answer to them. Our editor-in-chief does like weekly, choose some comments and answer to concerns and critiques that are not trolling but really critiques, and that works really well. People usually say, well, thank you, I share your point or not, but still thank you for answering. And in fact, we're trying to display a new comment system when it's more easy for journalists to answer to criticism or to comments, and like the person who is commenting gets an alert, like, well, someone from El Diario has commented on your comment. And I think that's helpful, especially for the debate. And the trolling part is hard, because you have to spend a lot of time, energy, and money to moderate. So we're trying this sort of to sophisticate this algorithm where members and also journalists can sort of vote down when there is something really angry. And of course, in the extreme cases of insults, threats, really horrible threats against journalists, against other people in the comment section, we just take off the comments. But it's a challenge, and you want to keep the debate open, but not become like a really horrible place that you don't want to look at.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Thanks very much for sharing all your experience. I think it's a real inspiration for everyone in the room, particularly those who are trying to launch something similar, and very much in the spirit of Perugia to share. So you talked a lot about how you make your members happy, and a little bit now about sometimes how you make them unhappy. I think it'd be really interesting for those who are thinking about launching something similar to what you're doing, if you could share a bit more about where do you think your members may feel that you've broken the social contract that you have with them? I think we've all thought a lot in the last sort of 2 weeks or so about the example of the correspondent and the response to their decision to not set up an office in the US. And I just wonder whether any of you are willing to share any examples where you've really seen the needle move in the wrong direction from your point of view after something you've done, where some of your members felt this was not what they had signed up for.
Yeah, I have a very fresh example of that. So this fall, we announced that we will not only cover the climate crisis, but also try to help find the solution, or at least not only describe, but also participate in the solution, which means that we as a company will try to reduce our carbon, what's it called? Footprint, exactly. Thanks. And then shortly after, maybe 2 weeks after, we announced that we made a partnership with the flight company Norwegian, so that if you were a Norwegian customer, you could get bonus points when becoming a Zetland member. And that was, of course, troubling, or at least that really pissed some off, obviously, I'd say. And it led to a huge discussion internally, because the organization was split in this question. You know, should we or should we not cancel this cooperation or this partnership? And it led us to ask the members, what do you think? And they were split as well. You know, some said, okay, you cannot, please do not become a holy hippie place where we don't fly and don't eat meat. And the other half said, you know, you should not have done this. And eventually it ended up with us saying, okay, we should not have done this. And then we reported on the process. How did we come to this conclusion? And just, you know, told it out loud, and we're super transparent about our mistakes and all the cringy, embarrassing moments in that process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important to apologize, to be transparent, and never to say that it is somebody else's fault if you sort of make a mistake or a misunderstanding. It's never the fault of the readers or other journalists. And we have like many examples of stories that weekly, as I say, our editor-in-chief answers to concerns. And sometimes he says like, well, you're right, this is not complete, or we shouldn't have done this, or this ad is not enough, it's not clearly marked enough as an ad, especially with native advertising. We got like some criticism about that travel story about Israel a few weeks ago. It was native advertising, it was said so, but it was maybe not clear enough. With native advertising, you should be extra clear and extra careful. And the most important thing is always, even if you feel that you have done something right, is just recognize that, well, if it's not clear enough, it's your fault, because that's your responsibility. And especially if you have a membership that you are calling this model membership, is for something, right? It's not subscription. That sounds more transactional. Members, well, it implies that you have a maybe extra responsibility with readers. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I understand that membership is a new stream of revenue, and especially in this busy, crowded space that the media are, it's important to try to monetize our work and the information like a newsroom provide. But I'm thinking also about people that don't have the means to subscribe or to become a member. What about the most underserved communities? Like, how can they contribute, become a member without financially contributing? But do you have in-kind support, or how do you engage with people who would not or don't have the means to pay for it, to ensure that everyone gets the information you provide? Or do you have schemes for people who can't pay for it, but would contribute in kind or differently?
Yeah. It's a good question. So journalism costs money, and so we have decided not to give our content away for free. But when we ask our members, why do you support us? They say, because you do great stuff, and I like the service, and I like your journalism. But most of them say, because I think it's important that your kind of journalism exists and that it's open. So we don't have the exact same model as you do in Spain, but since every member can share as many stories as they want to, they can help make the content free. And so that's part of the value proposition, that you pay for the content so that others can actually use it. Yeah.
So at The Guardian, we both have recurring contributions, so you can do it on a monthly or annual basis, but single contributions as well. Now, the single contributions are a much more dominant means of giving, for example, in the US, but they're also very much in place for this reason. So we've spoken to people whose employment might be variable. They could be a freelancer, so sometimes they work, sometimes not, go through hardship. And what we've heard from readers is that the single contribution offers them a way of giving when they can. We also have set a very low initial contribution rate, so you can give for as little as $1 in the US. In our terms and conditions, people can also write us and say if they've fallen into hardship and ask for a refund within about a month's time of the contribution, and for a larger range of reasons. But lastly, the proposition is that you support The Guardian so that The Guardian's journalism remains open and accessible to everyone. And so I am interested later on in exploring other ways in which people can support us. The onus was very much on the financial sustainability to start, but I'm personally really intrigued by that, and that's something I've invested a lot of time in other workplaces. So it may be something that we look into in
Your
the
question
midterm.
should keep us up at night as society.
Yeah, actually at El Diario, we've been thinking about that. Well, it's quite affordable if you want to contribute, because you can pick your exact amount. You can give €1 a month if you want. Please give more. But like a few weeks ago, a group of young developers, maybe it's not like the kind of people that you were thinking about, but it's still young, developed for us a skill for Alexa, just for free, because they love El Diario. I'm not sure if they are members, probably not all of them are members, but they just were sort of testing Alexa, and they thought, well, let's develop a skill for El Diario. And they gave us for free. We're still sort of fixing because it's not perfect, but it's a good example that, well, maybe you give the chance for people to just help you with an event or any other activity that would make them feel involved in your process and happy to be there, and just feel that El Diario is also part of their lives in a more meaningful way.
Just the last question, maybe. No question?
There's a guy doing
there was
this.
a question. Just the last one, yeah.
Stay.
Okay, very quick. Yeah. Microphone? Yeah. No? Okay.
I would like to ask you if what about Zetland said was really interesting, that people ask you for more audio version of your articles. I would like to ask if the others had this kind of feedback from the readership, especially The Guardian, who has such a wide and diverse readership. If you have any idea of what people want more from journalists and what kind of journalistic service they would like to have and we would be willing to pay for.
I mean, we certainly field lots of comments and suggestions from readers, and it can be everything from a suggested topic or request or recipe to having the journalism in a different format. We recently launched a daily news podcast, Today in Focus, and for many readers, this is something that, now they're listeners, that they very much welcomed. I think similar to the need that you described, that podcast essentially helps readers understand a sort of dominant news story, and just really one only per podcast. And so I think for us, it's not so much that there's like that simple, it's not like a checklist that we're giving to readers and you can say, okay, here are my top priorities, but I think it's over time really developing the process and the tools that we can better understand both what are requests and what are needs and the differences between them. But absolutely, this happens, I think, on a daily basis at the desk level as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming. I hope you have enjoyed the panel, and give the speakers a hand.